It began not with a grand declaration of war, but with silence. A silence that spread like a disease across the stars. The first colonies to fall were on the fringe of human expansion. Small outposts, built more on hope than resources. Fragile domes on hostile worlds where people clung to survival with stubborn determination. One by one, their signals vanished. No distress calls. No evacuation reports. Just silence. At first, Earth told itself the comforting lies of bureaucracy. Equipment failure. Signal interference, perhaps pirate raids. But when convoys sent to investigate never returned, when entire flotillas disappeared into the void without leaving even debris behind, those lies crumbled. Humanity finally realized it was not alone in the galaxy, and the ones who had noticed us were not welcoming neighbors. They were predators cloaked in empires, their name whispered in, fragments across intercepted transmissions, the Xylar Dominion. For 10,000 years they had ruled this spiral arm with iron precision, crushing species that defied them, assimilating those who bent the knee, and erasing those deemed unworthy. To them, humanity was an infection that had spread too far, too fast, burning through planets with reckless expansion. The verdict they gave was not diplomacy nor negotiation. It was a sentence. Humanity would be erased not because of what we had done, but because of what they feared we might become. The Dominion expected fear. They expected humanity to fracture, to collapse under the weight of despair, and perhaps in their arrogance they had reason to believe it. After all, on Earth war had been our shadow for millennia. Borders, politics, greed. We had killed each other over land, over gods, over colors of cloth. By all logic, this should have been no different. When the Dominion announced their judgment, their fleets already descending upon our outer colonies, Earth should have splintered. Governments should have argued over responsibility. Corporations should have tried to profit from the chaos. Old enemies should have seized the moment for advantage. But something strange happened. For the first time in recorded history, humanity looked at itself not as fractured nations, but as a single people standing on the edge of extinction. Old rivalries dissolved overnight. Soldiers who once stared at each other across hostile borders now stood shoulder to shoulder, preparing to face a common enemy beyond the stars. The United Earth Accord was signed not with ceremony, but with urgency, as if the entire species understood that hesitation meant annihilation. Factories that once built luxury goods began forging weapons. Universities poured their brightest minds into new sciences of war. Children memorized evacuation drills as if they were nursery rhymes. In every city, from the spires of New York to the ruins of old Damascus, murals were painted with a single message: we will not kneel. And for the first time, the galaxy would learn that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology, nor its armies, but its defiance. The first battles were massacres. Humanity's fleets, though courageous, were unprepared for the Dominion's ancient war machines. Their dreadnoughts were cities in themselves, their weapons burning brighter than suns. Where they passed, human ships shattered like glass before tidal waves. Entire defense lines were erased within minutes. Orbital stations reduced to slag, planets bombarded until their atmospheres boiled. Billions died screaming into the void, their last transmissions filled with static and fire. And yet, even in annihilation, something began to stir. Reports spread of human ships refusing to retreat, fighting to the last round even as their hulls split apart. Civilians on doomed colonies who charged alien soldiers with crude weapons, buying precious minutes for others to escape. Stories of courage that should have been forgotten. In the ash instead spread like wildfire, carried on encrypted channels, whispered in refugee camps, etched into the hearts of those who survived. For the Dominion it was incomprehensible. Their logic was simple. Fear leads to surrender. Surrender leads to obedience. Obedience leads to order. But humanity did not follow their logic. Every defeat, every massacre, every planet burned only hardened our will. Like iron plunged into flame, we became stronger with every strike. And though we lost battle after battle, though the stars turned red with our blood, the Dominion began to feel something they had not felt in centuries. Not fear of our weapons, not fear of our numbers, but fear of the one truth they could not erase. Humanity would rather die than kneel. In the chaos of those early defeats, a secret began to take shape. A plan whispered only among the highest command and the brightest. Engineers humanity had left. The Dominion believed their technology unmatched, their fleets invincible. But humanity had always thrived not by being the strongest, but by being the most unpredictable. On the icy moons of Europa, in the hollowed asteroids of the Belt, in hidden labs beneath Earth's oceans, scientists and soldiers worked side by side, tearing apart scraps of Dominion wreckage and fusing it with human ingenuity. The result was crude, unstable, often deadly to those who tested it, but it was ours. New weapons were forged, prototypes of ships that bent rules of physics in ways Dominion engineers had long abandoned, cybernetic pilots who could think faster than machines, rail cannons that used planets, magnetic fields to accelerate projectiles beyond light's reach, and in the shadows of failure, there was always a single phrase painted on the walls of every hidden workshop: make them fear us. While humanity bled in the open battles, while planets burned and millions perished, the hidden flame of defiance grew stronger. The Dominion thought they were erasing a species. In truth, they were tempering one. The first sign that humanity had changed came at the Battle of Klyros Reach. The Dominion fleet entered orbit expecting another routine extermination. Bombard the cities, erase the resistance, move on. But instead of surrender, they found the skies alive with fire. Human ships that should have been broken toys darted between, dreadnoughts with impossible speed, weapons tearing holes in shields that were supposed to be impenetrable. A single prototype carrier, the Resolute Dawn, unleashed a storm of drones that attacked not with programmed patterns, but with human-guided unpredictability, overwhelming Dominion defenses. For the first time in recorded memory, a Dominion ship and a vessel that had ruled the void for centuries exploded, in flames under the guns of a younger species. The galaxy trembled. Humanity still lost the battle. The Resolute Dawn was destroyed. Klyros Reach burned and its survivors scattered. But a message had been written in fire across the stars. The Dominion was not invincible, and more dangerously, their prey had learned how to strike back. Across refugee fleets and hidden colonies, stories of Klyros Reach spread like holy scripture. Parents told their children not just of survival, but of victory. The Dominion's fear was no longer abstract. It had been proven in the wreckage of their dead. What the Dominion failed to understand was the nature of legends. Empires are built on fear, on obedience, on the memory of victories long past. But legends are born in defiance, in the refusal to kneel, in the unbreakable will of those who choose death over chains. Every fallen human became a martyr, every destroyed ship a beacon, every burned colony a rallying cry. The galaxy, long cowed under Dominion rule, began to watch in silence. The insectoid thrall, enslaved for millennia, whispered that perhaps humanity could succeed where they had failed. The reptilian Korth, whose warrior clans had been shattered generations ago, listened to tales of humans who fought with fire in their veins. Even within the Dominion's own ranks, doubt began to flicker. For if a species so young, so fragile, could wound their empire, what else might be possible? Meanwhile, humanity forged on. In hidden shipyards orbiting dead stars, fleets were built not of pride but of vengeance. Soldiers trained not for conquest but for survival. And as the Dominion spread its fleets thinner, chasing pockets of resistance across 1,000 systems, humanity prepared for the moment that would turn whispers into thunder. For the Dominion had tried to erase us from history. Instead, they had written the first chapters of our legend. The turning point was not a grand battle, nor a decisive victory, but a whisper in the dark. A Dominion command ship, the Vorith Prime, had grown arrogant after months of hunting down fleeing human convoys. It pursued a ragged flotilla of transports into the shattered remains of a supernova's graveyard. There, amidst fields of glowing debris and distorted gravity, the Dominion expected easy prey. Instead, they found a trap unlike any they had faced in centuries. Human warships cloaked in the radiation storms emerged in sudden unison. Their weapons were not elegant. They were brutal, improvised, designed with one purpose: destruction. Rail slugs forged from neutronium tore through Dominion armor, while suicide drones crippled shield generators. The Vorith Prime, flagship of an entire sector fleet, burned in less than an hour. Out of hundreds of human ships, fewer than a dozen survived. But their victory was carried across encrypted waves to every hidden colony, every refugee fleet. For the first time, humanity had not just survived, it had destroyed the heart of a Dominion fleet. That moment echoed louder than any speech, louder than any promise. It told the galaxy that humanity was no longer prey. It was a predator sharpening its claws. The Dominion reacted with fury. They unleashed entire legions, their armadas blotting out suns, determined to crush humanity before the legend spread further. Worlds burned. Resistance fleets shattered, billions more perished. But with every attack, the Dominion made a fatal mistake. They believed destruction would erase memory. Instead, destruction engraved memory deeper. Survivors of massacres carried their stories to the stars. Children orphaned by bombardment swore oaths to fight until their last breath. Every atrocity became fuel for the fire, and while the Dominion struck with overwhelming force, humanity struck with cunning. We did not meet them head-on. We bled them slowly, ambushing supply convoys, crippling shipyards, turning their own slave species against them in covert uprisings. For the first time in millennia, the Dominion was forced to fight a war it did not control, a war of attrition, a war of shadows, a war where their arrogance became their weakness. And in the silence of conquered worlds, whispers grew louder. The humans will come. Dominion began to realize they were no longer fighting a species. They were fighting an idea, and ideas once born cannot be killed. Then came the night of fire, the assault on Sul itself. For centuries, Earth had been the beating heart of humanity, the cradle of our species, the symbol of who we were. The Dominion believed that by erasing it, they would erase us entirely. Their fleets descended in numbers so vast they blotted out the stars, a wall of metal and fury stretching from horizon to horizon. But humanity had known this day would come. The skies above Earth blazed with defenses hidden for decades. Orbital cannons larger than mountains, swarms of drones, prototype warships forged in secrecy. Every city became a fortress, every civilian a fighter. The battle raged not for hours but for days, a storm of fire that lit the heavens. The entire continent shook with bombardments, oceans boiled. The moon itself cracked under the stress of orbital collisions. Yet through it all, Earth endured. The Dominion destroyed half the planet, but they could not break its spirit. For even as cities fell, even as billions died, transmissions poured out from Earth to the stars. Defiant voices screaming into the void, "We are still here. We are still fighting. We will never kneel." That broadcast, carried on the electromagnetic winds of war, reached not only humans but every enslaved species listening in secret. The Dominion had meant to make Earth an example of terror. Instead, they made it the symbol of rebellion. After Sul, the galaxy could no longer pretend. For centuries, the Dominion's rule had been painted as eternal, unbreakable, ordained by time itself. Yet here was a species barely out of its cradle, standing against the greatest armada ever assembled, and surviving. Across enslaved worlds, seeds of rebellion sprouted. The insectoid thrall rose in secret, slaughtering their overseers in the mines and vanishing into the caves. The Korth warrior clans reignited their ancient forges, forging weapons they had been forbidden to touch for generations. Even among the Dominion's own subject races, whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to planning. Humanity had done more than resist. It had proven that resistance was possible. For the Dominion, this was the greatest threat of all. They could fight fleets. They could burn worlds. But they could not kill the idea that spread like wildfire. The humans fight, and so can we. And while the Dominion scrambled to contain rebellion, humanity moved in shadows, building alliances where none had existed before. Ragged fleets of alien defectors joined with human convoys. Ancient technologies hidden away in shame were offered to the humans in exchange for freedom. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Dominion found itself not ruling an empire, but fighting for its survival. It was in these desperate years that the legend of humanity reached its true form. Our fleets were no longer isolated, our soldiers no longer fighting alone. Entire coalitions formed, patchwork alliances held together not by trust, but by necessity and shared rage. Human captains sailed alongside Korth war clans and thrall swarm ships, their banners stitched together in mismatched defiance. Every battle was brutal, every victory costly, but each one carried weight far beyond strategy. A shattered Dominion patrol ship meant hope for an enslaved planet. A liberated mining colony meant weapons for 100 more uprisings. Slowly, painfully, the balance began to shift. The Dominion still outnumbered us 100 to 1, still wielded technologies older than our species, but the tide of history was turning. And through it all, humanity's voice thundered, across the stars, and not the voice of leaders or generals, but of ordinary people who refused to kneel. Farmers who picked up rifles, Scientists who became soldiers, refugees who turned into resistance fighters. We were not born for this war, but the war forged us into something the Dominion could not comprehend. A legend that lived not in palaces, but in the hearts of the broken. The Dominion's greatest mistake was their arrogance. They believed legends to be fragile, shattered by fear, erased by power. But legends are not bound by flesh or steel. They are carried in stories, in memory, and whispers that outlive empires. When Dominion generals ordered the burning of the colony at Ardent Prime, they expected the usual outcome, ash and silence. Instead, the survivors carved into the ruins a single phrase. They tried to erase us, but we are still here. Broadcasts of those words reached across the galaxy, amplified by hidden networks carried by defectors, etched into the minds of every being who dreamed of freedom. The Dominion began to lose control not only of its fleets but of its narrative. For millennia, they had been the fear that shaped the galaxy. Now they had become the tyrant defied, the enemy to be destroyed. Humanity had not only survived their attempt at erasure, it had transformed into the story every oppressed race told their children at night. A story not of despair but of defiance. And deep in their gilded halls, the rulers of the Dominion began to understand the truth. Their reign was ending, not because of weapons, but because of a legend they themselves had created. The final campaign began not with humanity alone, but with the galaxy united. By then, uprisings had spread across 100 systems. Species that had once hidden in fear now fought openly, their courage born from humanity's defiance. Fleets of mismatched ships, human warcraft, Korth-Forge ships, Thrall swarm carriers, and dozens more, assembled in a patchwork armada, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were not united by politics, not by oaths or treaties, but by something far more dangerous, the shared belief that the Dominion could bleed. The chosen target was the Dominion's jewel, the fortress world of Xylar Prime, seat of their power, the symbol of their eternal rule. Dominion generals laughed when they heard of the plan, calling it suicide. And perhaps it was. But for humanity, suicide was nothing new. We had been choosing death over submission since the war began. As the coalition fleets prepared to jump, human commanders repeated the same message across every ship. Today, we do not fight for survival. Today, we fight to end the fear. The Battle of Xylar Prime was chaos given form. Never before had so many ships clashed in a single system. The skies turned into oceans of fire. Debris fields stretching for light hours. Planets shaking under the fury of weapons older than civilizations. Dominion dreadnoughts cut swathes through the coalition armada, their cannons tearing fleets apart in minutes. But for every ship they destroyed, 3 more hurled themselves into the fray. Human warships fought like wolves darting into the gaps, ripping apart enemy carriers with suicidal precision. Thrall swarms buried Dominion cruisers under endless waves. Korth-Forge ships rammed enemy battleships, detonating themselves in glorious fire. The Dominion still held power, still wielded overwhelming strength. But something had changed. For every order their admirals gave, a dozen rebellions ignited behind them. For every planet they secured, 10 more slipped from their grasp. And as Xylar Prime itself burned under bombardment, the unthinkable happened. The Dominion fleet, for the first time in 10,000 years, broke. Not because of superior firepower, but because their soldiers, long bound by obedience, saw the impossible happening. The humans had not only survived, they were winning. When the smoke cleared, Xylar Prime was nothing but ruins. Its palaces shattered, its fleet scattered into the void. The Dominion still existed, fragments of its power clinging to distant stars. But the heart of the empire had been torn out. And in that void, humanity stood not as conquerors, but as something far more enduring, a legend. Across the galaxy, children of 100 species grew up with a single story, that, when the most powerful empire in history tried to erase a fragile young race, that race chose defiance. That even when their worlds burned and their people starved, they refused to kneel. That they fought not only for themselves, but for everyone who had ever dreamed of freedom. The Dominion had sought to erase humanity from history. Instead, they had immortalized us within it. For in the ashes of their empire, one truth remained unshakable. They tried to erase us, but we became the legend they feared. And as humanity looked out across the stars, scarred but unbroken, one thought echoed in every heart: this was only the beginning.